glorious Orpington. And I moved to Japan in 2000 because I'd started going out with a Japanese man, and my job in London was dead end and going nowhere. So we decided to give Japan a try, and we stayed for 10 years. And then went back to the UK for a few years. And now we do, when COVID is not in action, a sort of 6 month Tokyo life and a 6 month UK life. And in Tokyo, we live in a tiny little house, and it is literally sitting on a railway. So if you hear lots of noise, that's the trains going past. And in the UK, we live with my dad. We lodge with my dad. Jolly Green Street Green.
I think if you hear trains going past, there's a chance that it might be me as well. I live
Oh, okay.
literally next to a train track. So that's probably the third thing that we've discovered we have in common, because I
Yeah.
are both a
Okay.
bit ill, so if there's a coughing fit,
Okay. When this
we're both,
meeting is over, we should measure how far we are from the
yeah,
railway line. I
yeah.
bet I win.
Oh no, I don't know. I don't know. We'll see. Um, so, Chris, why don't you tell us a little bit
Hmm.
more about your writing journey? When did you start writing? Can you share a
Mhm.
haiku with us? And
Ooh,
um,
yeah.
you don't have to share a haiku with us. That's very like strong upon you. But maybe a bit more about, yeah, well, what brought you to write short stories in the first place?
Yes, yes. Well, let me see. I started writing short stories just after I got to Japan. So yeah, between 1994 and 1998, somewhere along that line, I started to write short stories. I'm not really sure why. It could just be some way of handling the situation, some way of outputting, what I was feeling. Um, yeah, but the first one I wrote, The Jogger, it's actually included in Takeout Sushi. And it was published in an English language magazine called Nippon View in
Mm.
1998. I just sent it there on a whim, really. And
And had you considered
yeah.
yourself a writer before you started writing these short stories? Is that something that you had any experience of, or like had even crossed your mind until you started doing it?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I did, yeah, I did skip a bit there. I did write some children's stories, or
Hmm.
attempted to write some children's stories before I came to Japan. And I sent them to a few publishers in the UK and got some very nice rejection letters. And so maybe that was the first time I thought that perhaps there was a potential there to write.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah, but short stories for sure. It was after I came to Japan. Mm,
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
as someone who works in publishing, nice rejection letters do show that you're on the right track, because,
Yeah.
um, yeah, there's so many submissions sometimes that you can
Yeah.
end up with a form one just because of the volume of it. So,
Sure, sure. Well, quite
mm,
often they wrote, nice little comments at the bottom in pen. These were the days before the internet, of course. So I was typing my letters on a typewriter and
mm.
typing the stories out. So yeah, yeah.
And how did you find that sort of experience contrasted with trying to get Takeout Sushi published?
Oh, I think it got me aware of the process and the possibilities of being, turned down politely, and
Mm.
it, you know, alleviated the fear level there. I thought I could send Takeout Sushi to publishers, and with a bit of confidence that I'd be able to handle whatever came back to me.
Yeah.
And when I sent Takeout Sushi to Neem Tree Press, I got a response. I think it was 2 or 3 weeks later, and I
Mhm.
started reading the email, fully expecting it to end with "Thank you, but please try again somewhere else." But it didn't end like that. It said, "Let's have a online meeting." And that's when I did my little dance around the living room, and then yeah, replied to the email. Mm.
Brilliant.
Mm.
I want to ask whether you're a good dancer, but I think I should probably move on to Becky now and
Please
maybe
do.
not
Yeah.
ask you to dance. Becky,
Yeah.
so would you like to tell us a bit more about your illustrations and how you started illustrating?
Okay. Um, well, I started illustrating professionally last year for Takeout Sushi. I'll come to that in a minute. Before that, um, I'd done illustrations and handwritten books for my lovely sister's enterprise. She is a well, she trained as an actress and she now runs this little company called Magic Box, where she does interactive storytelling with children, little
Mm.
tiny children. And
Mhm.
often I help her develop the stories. We sort of develop a really rough script, and she's a character, like a princess who's got to go on a journey and she needs some help. And so at some point, always she says, "How can I get any help?" And all the children go, and then she started doing that. Went very well, and she started doing parties, and so she started doing these party packages. And the most expensive party package was a bespoke story for the child, plus a handwritten, handmade, hand illustrated book by me, like a little
Mm.
chapter book. So doing that, I really enjoyed, um, and I just had fun. Um, and what's helped me all the way is from that, I've just always tried to draw without worrying about drawing, just enjoying it. And if it's not very good, I just laugh and carry on. so um, then during COVID, I was
Mm.
here in Japan, and I like doing a little bit of writing as well. And so on Instagram, I did a little account called 10 Line Stories, and I wrote these little stories with 10 lines, and each one had a silly picture to accompany it. And that is, I think, what Alison at Neem Tree Press saw. Um, and that was lovely that she saw them and she read them. Uh, but then all of a sudden, out of the blue, last summer, she emailed me and said, "Do you want an illustrating job?" And I said to Chris, that I said to her, "Are you nuts?" Because I'm not actually a qualified illustrator and I don't know techniques. I don't know how to do it digitally. I only do pen and paper. Um, but she said, "Well, have a crack at it." And pen and paper's fine because we can just scan it. So that's how I got to do the Takeout Sushi illustrations. And I am forever grateful and thrilled to bits. And I love it. I love illustrating. So thank you, Alice. I know she's
Brilliant.
watching.
Yeah. I was wondering, do you have any highlights of those children's stories that you illustrated?
You
Do you
mean the
have a
ones for
favorite
my
one?
sister? Do I have a
Yeah.
favourite? Oh gosh, do you know there were quite a few. Um,
Mm.
at one point during COVID, we did the only other Zoom event I've done was with my sister. One of her old drama friends who lives in America. He runs some culture festival, and he wanted to talk to her about Magic Box. And so in preparation for that, we tried to count up how many books I'd done, and it was like about 15 or something. So
Oh,
it was
wow.
ridiculous. And gradually they got longer and longer and longer. The first one took me about 6 days, and the most recent one I did took me a month, I think,
Mm.
because I just get more and more involved in it, and the pictures have got more and more elaborate, I suppose. Not maybe not everyone's adjective for them, but by my standards, they got more elaborate. So I loved the one called the art. They were all called the Tale of, and one of them was called the Tale of the Artist in the Snow, about a kind of flappy artist in Norway or someone. Anyway, we went on an adventure to Lapland, and there were lots of
Mm.
jokes about reindeer droppings looking like chocolate raisins, like that.
Brilliant.
That stuck in my memory. Yeah.
Brilliant. And now you're both obviously working together on short stories, and there's more in the works as well. Um,
Cool.
so I thought I'd talk a bit more, like we maybe have a bit of a chat about short stories as a form, because I guess um, yeah, you've chosen short stories, Chris.
Hmm.
Reasons why? Is there anything that you think that novels could do that you can't do in a short story? And is there anything that conversely you think that short stories are good for that like you maybe couldn't get away with or couldn't quite do in a novel?
Hmm, hmm, hmm. Yeah. Well, firstly, I want to say that I like reading short stories. You know, and these days I probably read them more than I would a novel, and that's to do with hmm, time. I think it's a busy lifestyle. I think we all lead, and for me to carry a novel in my head from day to day to day with all the characters and interactions, um, yeah, I can't do it really that well, So if I want to get a quick read fix, adrenaline rush from reading a story, it would be a short story, and you sit down and you read it. It finishes, and you've got it. You feel that kind of satisfaction of reading it, having read it, and then you can move on to another story, or if it's a good story, I think it will sit in your mind for a while and maybe get you thinking, what happens next, or what happened next, or you know, what was going on in that story. So that's the kind of story that I think I aim to write. Um,
Hmm.
yeah. And novels, I did try to write a novel once, and it took me about 8 years,
Hmm.
um, you know, and it's on a hard disk drive in a closet somewhere in the apartment. So yeah, it's a lot of effort, and
Hmm.
not that short story writing isn't a lot of effort, but I feel more able to handle it, a short story, and yeah.
I
So I
suppose
think.
there's also a
Mhm.
curation process that happens
Hmm.
with short stories. How do they
Mhm.
sit together and do they exist in the same world? You've got quite an interesting world that you explore in Takeout Sushi because in most ways it's a familiar one to people living in Japan, but in some ways it's a bit futuristic. You've got HR being taken over by robots. You've got
Right.
incredibly high-tech phones. You've got a few sort of slightly less sort of realistic things. Yeah, if you want to chat a bit more about that. Um,
Sure, sure. Well, yeah, yeah. I just, what can I say? When I write a story, a short story, my day-to-day life living in Japan, I mentally say no to many things and restrict myself in many ways, I think. But when it comes to a story, what I've tried to do is just take the brakes off and
mhm,
just write the thing, and then not try to criticize myself. Just write it and then work hard on the refining of what I've written
mhm,
without deleting that much. So, yeah, it may take me a week or two to write the first draft, but it could take me 4, 5, 6 weeks to come to a point where I can think, that's okay, and move to the next one. So, yeah, and thanks for mentioning the robots as well, and the cell phones.
mhm,
My job is, it's IT based, and I've been looking at a lot of technology in the last few years. Go to a lot of expos in Tokyo, and cover a real wide range of stuff, from robots, drones, of course, which are robots, and yeah, signage, various types of uh, communication technology, VR, AR, gaming, so many things, e-mobility as well. And because I've had all that input from various expos and various literature and stuff, it's all in there. And yeah, it's found its way out in a couple of stories in Takeout Sushi for sure,
mhm.
and in a couple of stories that I think are going to come out in the next collection. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and finally, I guess, why the name Takeout Sushi?
Oh. Yeah. Well, I don't really have an interesting answer for that. I just thought I had a collection of stories, and I tried deliberately to choose stories that were quite different from each other. Not just in the location, but from, say, the first person, third person perspective. And I didn't want to have a set of 17 stories that were pretty much, first person all the way through to the end, a male protagonist. I wanted to mix them up. And then I thought, well, what has some sort of variation in Japanese life? Something that you could just take a morsel of, enjoy it, and then maybe move on to the next morsel. And then I thought, well, sushi is kind of like that. You take sushi out from a restaurant or a supermarket, and for sure there'll be the ones that you like, the tuna and the salmon, and there'll be the ones that you'd rather not eat, like in my case, it would be anything that's to do with shellfish or fish eggs or that kind of thing, and you can pass that over to your wife or your daughter to eat instead. So yeah, it's that kind of image of variety and acknowledging the fact that you're probably not going to eat the whole lot in one sitting. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. I
yeah.
suppose if it hadn't been called Takeout Sushi, you wouldn't have
Hmm.
had the fabulous cover image, which I've got popped up
That's right.
behind me, which I think works super well just because it's,
Hmm.
I think that there is also that element of living in Japan, the sushi, but also like it's always people in slightly like odd predicaments or in situations that feel a bit strange and unfamiliar. And I think that, that image kind of
Yeah,
sums that up quite nicely as well.
it
Um,
does.
but yeah, I kind of wanted to move on to Becky now and
Hmm.
ask about the process of illustrating and interpreting short stories, because it sounds like you've done some longer form things as well. But with each short story here, you've got just one illustration. So how do you go about working on that?
Well, I didn't before I started, I didn't know. So first thing I did, and so I've had a couple of jobs since, and I've used the same the same work ethic. The first thing I did is just read the stories, um, and then after that, I got sent Chris's brief for the illustrations. Like he made suggestions of things that he thought might be a good idea for illustrating. So I would make note those down, and then each time I did an illustration, I reread that story, and sort of if I wanted to add a little bit or slightly skew what Chris has said. And often, I'll be honest, it was because sometimes I thought, I don't know if I can draw that. So I just kind of slightly alter it. Um, I was surprised about what I could draw. That was one of the lovely things about the whole thing.
Mm.
Um, but um, but yeah, so I used Chris's input, which was really helpful, and then thought, can I add anything or just twist it a little bit, um,
Yeah,
and had a good time. Mm.
because we've discussed it before, and what we sort of said was there's something to do with the mood, really. Like, I think
Mm.
that's the main thing in interpreting the stories into illustrations is how do you feel while reading them? And so,
Yes. Mm.
yeah.
Yes, yes, definitely. So like the first one, the swallows, which has got it's rather, it's almost a little bit bleak, that story, isn't it? Bleak and poignant. Um, so I think the picture I did for it was quite spare. It didn't need a lot in it. Um, whereas the one, thank you, Chris.
There you go.
Well,
Um,
I've got to be useful somehow,
Whereas the one about the dummies, the with the criminals, and they're, it's kind of hilarious and like forehead slapping in their behavior and what they say. Um, First of all, Chris had said, do how about that little drawing with the ladies dances, that's a Japanese Obon Matsuri. It's a summer festival where
Hmm.
people do taiko drumming and people dance around that central thing. Um, and I thought, I don't know if I can draw a Bon Odori festival, goodness me. So, but they do, that bag features quite heavily in the story, and so does the can of beer. So I thought, well, I'll start with that. And I thought, I might try, I might try a festival as well. And actually, I quite liked the way it turned out. I didn't deliberately draw it like that, but I quite like the way that the bag and the beer are in the foreground, because they do have an effect on the person who is in ownership of those things. And the Bon Ordre is in the background, hopefully, I don't know, looks a bit dreamy because it should. um, because of drunkenness. So so that has more in it. And as I drew it, I really enjoyed putting more in it. It was a nice feeling. Yeah. Plus, I love summer festivals, and you will
Yeah.
be hard pressed to stop me dancing to a taiko drum in summer. I always join the little old ladies in their kimonos. I don't know about you, Chris.
No, I've never done that actually. Yes,
Oh,
yes.
recommend it.
Yeah.
Well, actually, that brings me very neatly to the next question I wanted to ask, which was about life in Japan and how you draw inspiration from that in your work for both of you. And it might be something where you'll bounce off each other, so don't feel like you have to take turns here.
Hmm. Go ahead, go ahead.
Oh well, there was I think my pleasure. I think the summer festival drawing came out much better than I thought it would, and I think that was genuinely because I love summer festivals.
Hmm.
Um, I remember when we chatted the other day, Chris, and I said my drawing for the choice, the worried man on the train.
Yes, yes.
Um, I think if I'd been in England drawing a worried man on a train in England, he would have looked completely different. And I think that's
Well,
because I've seen lots of worried men on trains in Japan looking slightly harassed. And so I guess that was a Japanese influence on me. I don't know if that was a Japanese influence on you, Chris. Have you seen lots of harassed men on trains? I imagine you have.
I don't know. Maybe my reflection in the window. Yeah. But no, I really love this,
Okay.
yeah, because, it's really up to date as well. The young guys in the office, they wear these really short jackets. I don't know if they
Yes.
do that in the UK, but really short jackets. And I walk around thinking, did they buy a jacket 2 sizes too short? You know,
They are,
and
they
did they
wear
know?
very, very
Yeah.
fitted
Right,
slimline
right,
suits, don't
right.
they? And
Yeah,
they tend, because they're in trans, they tend to be very slender, don't they, Chris? There are
they
lots of
do. They do.
really slender men with these very elongated shoes.
I was going to mention that. Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah,
it's a nice
yeah.
image to work with. And
Mm.
and that was one of the few pictures I did where I didn't really need to do a lot of reference, on Google, because I do that
Mm.
all the time. I Google, I even Googled Japanese summer festivals and what does a rumpled bag look like and things like that.
Really?
Um, just for reference, but actually he kind of came out of my head, and I was very surprised with that. I was very surprised.
Really?
Yeah.
I thought you were kind of sitting on the train going around the Yamanote Sen for
I
like
should try
hours
that.
and then, yeah,
Practice.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Mm.
Wow. I'm disappointed now.
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry.
Well, Chris, are there any stories that you particularly relate to in the collection?
Well, yes. I mean, every story, has a little bit of me or a little bit of my experiences in. Um, so many of them. Well, every story, so it's difficult to choose one, but probably the one that has the most of me in yeah, it's the swimming pool one, right? Where yeah, so it's basically three parts to it. The first part is in South Africa, and the second part returning to UK, living in the UK, and then the third part going back to South Africa. So yeah, the first part is pretty much my memory of being at the bottom of the pool, looking upwards, at the blue sky and feeling really at peace with myself and the world. I don't know how old I was, somewhere between 2 and 5. And yeah, fortunately, somebody pulled me out with a rake, But after that, yeah, it's pure imagination. And that's another case of just letting it go. I didn't know where it was going to go at the end, and just hanging in there. And I came to a point where I thought, well, that's okay, that's good enough for me, and I left it at that point. Yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I suppose it's something that's nice in the short story is that leaving things unresolved as well is something you can just do. I mean, obviously, novels can do that, but there's lots of things that get resolved within the narrative.
Right.
And it's nice to have a bit of a mood of, ooh, like, where will this go next? And leave readers thinking that as well.
I think so too. Yeah, I think there's some readers that would rather it end, everything tied up nicely, but you can't please everybody, unfortunately. So I
Yeah.
just went with it. So yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But everything, even the swallows, to be honest, it's really more of a homage to one of my favorite Japanese authors, yeah, Makoda Kuniko. She wrote some fantastic short stories, and I don't think she wrote any about swallows, but but I wanted to embody in some way the tone and the style, a bit of that melancholy in the writing there. And I also, took the two main characters, the Tsune, the lady, and Matsu, the husband. Uh, they're the names or parts of the names of the two characters in her story, the name of the flower. So I kind of just pulled in little bits there into the story, and like I said, yeah, I mean we have lived in an apartment that had swallows nesting outside, and it's such a joy to see them, to be able to open the door, look up, and see these little heads popping out over the top of the nest. You're so close in touching distance to nature, even though you're living in this concrete apartment block. So that it's just a joy to be able to watch them come in and out and feed, and then the sadness, of course, when they leave. So yeah, that's what I was trying to embody in that story.
It's yeah, in my parents' home there's a sort of rollout blind that sort of creates shade in the summer, and I don't think we've ever used it because every year sparrows come and make a nest in it, and so instead you can just look up at it and see the little baby sparrows with their mouths completely open, sort of begging for food and that sort of thing. So I think that's maybe yeah, I get what you mean about the joy of seeing just that wildlife happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was wondering, do you read much fiction in Japanese, or do you read more in translation, or?
Yeah, I did at first read fiction in Japanese because it was a way of learning Japanese, and here's that Makoda Kuniko book, Trump Omoide. And this is one of the joys of Takeout Sushi. I always wanted to have a short story collection with illustrations inside. And so, this is just a little example of an illustration on one of the short stories, right? And so each of the short stories here has an illustration. And just like Rebecca was saying, it kind of gives you a glimpse into what the story is going to be about, but doesn't tell you everything. And you want to be turning the pages to find out, what's going to happen in this story.
That's really funny, Chris. I too have preferred a Japanese book. I haven't read
Oh,
this. My husband was reading this a while ago,
mm,
and this is a novel, but it
mm.
also has illustrations, and
Mm.
they're so lovely. They're just, like
Oh,
that's
yeah.
a night scene, and
Mm.
Uh-huh.
what's that other one? I people in the rain. It's just gorgeous.
Mm,
And I think it's much more here in Japan that they have illustrations in their books for grown-ups,
yeah.
just for kids, which is lovely. Yeah.
Mm, mm,
Yeah,
Um,
that's really interesting because, at Neem Tree, we decided that our short story collections would have illustrations. And it's just really so nice that that actually really fits for Takeout Sushi, the sort of stories that you're writing and the sort of stories that you've been reading that have inspired it as well. And it
mm,
was something where we did think, it is nice to have an illustration that sets a mood a bit and that sort of maybe without giving anything away, just gives you a sense of the feeling of it, just like you were saying, Chris.
yeah.
Um,
yeah.
I have one more question, and then we might move on to the reading. But I'm just very personally interested in the translation aspect versus like the reading in Japanese, because Japanese books, I think, have a very distinctive tone when they're translated into English. They tend to be very sort of, um, I call it like quiet prose, just because it's very measured, it's very calm, and it's something where like it explores things that are really intriguing often, or really sort of out of this world, but in this very measured way that feels really like almost relaxing, and kind of contrasts sometimes with the topic. And, I think there's a bit of that in Takeout Sushi, but I was also wondering, is that something that's more about the language of Japanese, or is it something that's to do with the writing culture? Is it, because I know that when we translate from French, because I read French, I realized that, oh, okay, I can kind of read the French through this, and this is partly the style is part of how the language works. So I was just wondering if you had any insight on that. Sorry, it's a difficult question.
Yeah, it certainly is a difficult question. Yeah. How about you, Rebecca? Any ideas on that?
I completely agree with you, Cecilia, about it being measured and calm. And I've read a few. I don't read in Japanese. I don't have all the alphabets under my belt, but I've read Haruki Murakami in translation, and he has an amazing translator. And I've read Banana Yoshimoto in translation, and she had a very good translator. Earlier this year, I read a book that I didn't think was translated very well. It jarred a lot when I was reading it. But I think the thing about them being calm and measured, I don't know what you think, Chris. Um, the way Japanese grammar is structured, um, you are given information at the beginning of the sentence, but
Mm,
you're not told if that sentence is positive or negative until the end, are you,
right.
Chris?
Well, there's
So,
that. Yeah. Yeah.
so it
And
can be very the way they use the way they the way questions are asked in Japanese can be very indirect. Sometimes you're not even sure you're being asked a question. That's been my experience.
mm,
um, so it is a different way of using language. Do you think that, Chris?
yes,
Compared
yes, I think so.
to British English.
Yeah, yeah. I do translate from Japanese to English, but in the work scenario, not fiction though, so yeah, but yeah, what you've said so far makes, yeah, the calming, hmm, I would say certainly, yeah, in the short stories I've read by hmm, Haruki Murakami and yeah, other Japanese writers. Yeah, it is measured for sure, paced very carefully, mm, control, yeah, and as you said, Rebecca, yeah, the point about the sentences being kind of reversed, the point comes right at the
Yeah,
end,
yeah,
you don't actually know
yeah,
how it's going to end until you finish seen the
yeah,
last
yeah.
letter.
Mm.
Yeah. Cecilia, that's a question that's beyond my pay grade, really. I
That's
think it's a bit.
it.
I don't feel, qualified enough to answer that, unfortunately. But I wish I could. But but I
I
think
think it's just
Rebecca's.
interesting to have your thoughts and you have a perspective on this in
Hmm,
reading both in Japanese and in English that
yeah,
me
it doesn't
and
always work that way. I've read
Mm.
some, I don't know, crime-related
yeah.
novels. Um, Out is one of them, and that's yeah, didn't feel measured at all in terms of
Okay.
the
Mm,
yeah.
Oh.
It was really you know edge of the seat stuff from
yeah.
first page to last, which was great, really great. In fact, I preferred the Japan. Yeah, I prefer the Japanese. I think I preferred the Japanese. Yeah, yeah.
Mm, yeah. Well, thank you very much for that. I think that's just a really interesting topic to be talking about, and I think I could just keep going on it. But I also know that people are quite eager to hear a bit more of your own writing, Chris. So
Hmm.
we'll do a Q&A after this, but
Okay.
while people gather their thoughts and think about what questions they might want to ask, would you please read us some of Takeout Sushi?
Well, yes. Oh, I've taken out the bookmark from where I was going to start reading. It wasn't very clever. Sure. Here we go. Well, we'll try a bit of the choice then. I think it's going to take a few minutes, and I found when I read this to myself today that there's a couple of quite long words in here that are difficult to say. So the next time I write a short story, I'm going to eliminate any long words that are difficult to say, so that when this opportunity comes again, I'll just be able to sail through.
You'll have to edit by reading out loud.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
Well, here goes. The choice. The young man was a creature of routine. He left his apartment at the same time every weekday morning to catch the bus. The 8:56 bus he boarded arrived at the train station at 9:06, leaving him a short walk to the ticket gate, through it and up the stairs to the platform where the 9:10 train to Tokyo Station would just be pulling in. On the train, he would stand near the opposite door, open his smartphone, and launch a game of Sudoku. This morning would surely be no different. The young man aimed to complete the game just as the train pulled into Tokyo Station, no earlier and certainly no later. Wherever he was, he had to have a plan. He had to have a task predetermined so that there were no choices to make. Without choice, he could survive. With choice, he was lost. His workplace was a haven to the routine. Tap his name tag on the card reader to open the door to the office. Turn on his computer and enter his username and password. Open the document manager application. Take the topmost paper item from the red tray to the right of the computer. Read it. Fill in the blanks on the screen. When complete, stamp the box at the bottom left of the paper item and move the item to the green tray to the left of the computer. Click the next button in the document manager application. Take the topmost paper item from the red tray to the right of the computer and repeat until it was 5 p.m. and time to go home. In contrast, the weekends were a nightmare. On waking, he'd be instantly trapped in uncertainty. Eat breakfast first or have a shower first? If breakfast first, would he then wait until he had paid a visit to the toilet before taking a shower or get straight into the shower? If it was a shower first, would he get dressed afterwards or slip his pajamas back on? The day that lay ahead posed endless choices, and he was paralyzed by them. Sometimes he would stand in his living room, locked in mind and body, unable to decide. The minutes would pass, 5, 10, 20, 30, and he would be rooted to the spot until he made a choice, or worse, a choice was made for him, perhaps by the missing of an opportunity or by the elimination over time of all options but one. The day would roll on, its potential for enjoyment, frivolity, and fun smothered into a monotonous grey smog of indecision. The young man was not unintelligent. He knew there was a problem, and he knew it needed a solution, but he couldn't take the first step to help himself. There must be a self-help book I can read, he had thought. There were too many. Make better decisions. Make smarter choices. Don't overthink. Do it now. He couldn't decide which book to read. He carefully read every page, every review of each book, and compared each, by which time his head, crammed with and burdened by that information, he was incapacitated and unable to buy a book for fear of buying an inferior one. It goes without saying that life is full of decisions. In fact, there are some who believe that our decisions define us. We are what we decide. The young man was a believer too, and yet unable to act. Is that okay for you, Cecilia? Keep going?
Sorry, I muted myself. I think keep going. Yeah.
Okay. Here we go. However, on the train that morning, the young man didn't finish his game of Sudoku. In fact, he never made it to Tokyo Station. As the train pulled out of Shinkiba Station, a woman at the door across from the young man gasped heavily, having just run up the steps at Shinkiba Station and darted across the platform into the cabin as the doors pinched her back. Cursing, she threw her bulging black business backpack onto the floor and aggressively tore open the top zip and ripped out a slim, shiny, and screaming smartphone. As she did, the train lurched, as it always did when changing lines at that very point on the track. Unbalanced, the woman was sent hurtling across the cabin towards the young man. The young man heard a thump of leaden footsteps and saw a visage rapidly approaching in the corner of his eye, but was unable to take evasive action. 48 hours later, the young man regained consciousness. During those hours, although he had been incapacitated and unable to make even one decision for himself, countless decisions had been made on his behalf by passengers, railway staff, an ambulance crew, hospital staff, and legal teams. The woman who collided with force into him fractured her forearm and wrist, as well as several small bones in the hand that held her smartphone. She decided within a few minutes of it happening, and with a minimum of fuss, to contact her lawyer to instigate legal action against the railway company and the driver of the train. She also launched action against the young man for being stood where he was and not taking steps to mitigate her injuries. And her final legal action was for the loss of her smartphone. Of the other people on the train at the time, one of the passengers was a young woman who saw the incident and its outcome and yet managed to control her emotions and revulsion sufficiently to stand up and stab the emergency button, alerting the driver. The driver of the train also took action on hearing the alarm ringing in his cabin, hitting the brake lever and sounding the alarm throughout the train. After bringing the train to a stop, the driver called in and notified those running the network that his train was at a standstill. The driver then left his cabin to investigate, walked down the track to the carriage in which the alarm had been raised, and forced his way in. Fighting the urge to throw up, the driver called through for an ambulance to be ready at the next station, then scrambled back to his cabin and set the stock rolling forwards. From his hospital bed, the young man looked up at the faces staring down at him and wondered who they were, where he was, and why he was here. He had no recollection of the incident on the train. The last memory he had was of the bottom right block of the Sudoku puzzle he had been battling with. He was just about to enter the number 3 into one of the squares and was agitated by not being able to do so. He caught a glimpse of his smartphone on the cabinet to his right, but couldn't raise his arm to reach it, as his arm had been strapped to his side. The most elderly-looking of the people gathered around him, a man, ventured closer and bent down to the young man's head and began to talk. "I'm Dr. Abe. Please don't be alarmed by the new environment and the strange faces. You are in Kasai Hospital and are in very safe and capable hands. You were involved in a collision with another passenger in a train a couple of days ago, and you lost consciousness. As is sometimes the case with head injuries, there can be a significant loss of memory. Do you remember anything of the accident?" The young man shook his head. "I see. Are you in any pain or discomfort right now?" The young man nodded and opened his mouth to speak. "My head feels numb. All of me does, actually. And there is something wrong with my left eye. I can't see a thing," he said. "Thank you for confirming. Allow me to confer with my colleagues." The doctor turned away and huddled at the end of the bed with the others. The sickness of panic rose from the young man's stomach to his chest and then spilled up into his mouth. He had lost consciousness. He had lost memory. He was in a hospital bed and not in control. He was about to scream, but fortunately, the doctor returned to his bedside. "We need you to be very brave while I explain the situation. Can you do that for us?" The young man nodded, but he was lying. What we have here is a first, as far as we know, in the field of medicine. What appears to have happened is that due to a sudden lurch of the train you were riding, a woman lost her balance and unavoidably collided with you at extreme force. Both of you have sustained injuries. The woman's arm, wrist, and several bones in her hand were fractured. She has received treatment, and it will be a few months before she makes a full recovery. Have you understood what I have said so far?" The young man understood. The doctor continued. "You, on the other hand, are unfortunately in a much worse situation, and one that will ultimately be influenced by your decision on how you want to proceed. You see, as the woman collided with you, she was holding her smartphone, the new Snap NN10, which was released for sale just a day before the accident. One of the smartphone's features is its slimness. It is branded as the thinnest smartphone in the world. As the woman collided with you, the smartphone made contact with your left eye socket. Being constructed of such thin and yet tensile material, behind which was the substantial mass of the woman moving at considerable velocity, the smartphone broke cleanly through your left eye socket and lodged itself behind the eye in the left side of your brain. Remarkably, the eye suffered minimal damage and should make a full recovery. Your brain, although bruised and bleeding at first, has miraculously withstood the brutality of the collection. Your eye socket can, with a little reconstruction, be returned to close to its original shape and function." The doctor straightened and turned to look at his colleagues for support. There were nods and grimaces of approval. The doctor bent down to the young man's level again. "To summarize, you have the world's most advanced smartphone lodged in your brain. My colleagues assembled here today are some of the leading neurologists in Japan. We have spent the last 48 hours analyzing the situation, discussing it, and also conferring with experts around the world, including the maker of the smartphone. We believe there are 2 choices available to you." The young man wished the doctor would stop talking. He had been terrified by the details of the accident, but now he was being tortured by the thought of having to make a decision about it. "The first choice is to leave the smartphone where it is. Let me add that the phone is deeply lodged in your brain, and that there is the danger of more damage being caused by trying to remove it than by letting it remain there. We think that with a little resculpturing, we can completely cover the smartphone with skin, and you will look pretty much like you did before the accident. The young man couldn't stop a tear rolling out of the corner of his right eye and dropping onto the pillow. The second choice is to remove the smartphone. As explained, this is highly risky. However, having a smartphone in your brain is clearly not a natural scenario. My colleagues and I are split 50-50 on which is the best choice for you. It really is up to you to cast the deciding vote, as it is a choice that may determine the quality with which you live the remainder of your life. The young man blinked, then opened his mouth to speak. Sensing this, the doctor drew a little closer. Could I have a few minutes to think in private? The young man whispered. Of course, of course. We'll be back in, say, 15 minutes' time, okay? The young man nodded. The doctors made their way out of the room, mumbling among themselves, and the door to the room closed behind them. The young man was alone. Unfettered by the presence of others, he sobbed freely and beat the mattress with his fists, although without force due to the strapping around his arms. After a while, he had calmed sufficiently enough to return to the issue in hand, to leave the smartphone in his brain or risk its removal. What a decision to have to make, and of all people, why me? I will never be able to decide in 15 minutes. 15 days would not be long enough. Just then, a painful jolt of vibration, energy and noise shot through the young man's head down to his feet, and with a yelp he sprung up in the bed. As he sank back down onto the bed, exhausted, the jolt repeated. On the third ring, he had worked out what was happening and didn't need to hear the words of the doctor, who had run shouting back into the room. The alarm! The smartphone's alarm setting is still on. The woman told us she set the alarm on the smartphone every 10 minutes between 9 and 10 a.m. It's 9 a.m. now, so you'll have to bear with it another 6 times. I'm terribly sorry to have forgotten to tell you. It must have been a great shock. The young man nodded. The doctor turned away towards the door. The young man couldn't believe his bad fortune. Not only was a functioning smartphone lodged in his brain, but its alarm was set and in vibration mode too. And yet, if he could somehow put up with it 6 more times, surely its battery would run flat and he would never hear the alarm again. Maybe then he could live with a smartphone in his brain. The doctor glanced back. Ah, I almost forgot to mention that the smartphone, while not only being the world's slimmest, is also the world's first fully self-charging one. Technology is amazing, isn't it? Of course, this means its battery will never run down, and its alarm will ring at the same time every day in perpetuity. The young man shook his head from side to side, gently at first, then stronger, until a pulse of pain burst across his forehead, forcing him to stop. Are you okay? Asked the doctor. Do you wish to say something? The doctor drew closer, close enough to feel the warmth of the exhausted young man's breath swirl in his inner ear. Get it out of me, the young man screamed. Get it out of me now.
Thank you very much for that. I think that's a cautionary tale to anyone who's feeling indecisive this morning. Well, afternoon now, and later for you.
Well, I'm going to re-edit this story for the next print run and remove the word incapacitated. It appears that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I think we've just about got time. There's a couple of questions here. One is, Chris, do you read many short stories, and if so, which ones? And what do you think are the particular challenge of writing Japan set stories?
Yeah. You know, I read more short stories for sure than novels, and I have very favorite authors of short stories, obviously Chekhov, and we're talking about people like yeah, Hajin, um, you know, yeah, Haruki Murakami, of course. He wrote some fantastic short stories. In fact, I prefer his short stories to his novels, you know, to be honest. So yeah, many short stories. Mm. Yeah, yeah.
Challenges of writing Japan set stories.
Mm. Hmm. You know, I don't know about challenging, but one of the things I try to avoid in the short story is I don't want to teach people about Japan.
Mm.
You know, I'm by no means an expert in Japan or its language, and I avoid, you know, writing Japanese words in the short story and then having to translate it, for example. Um, I don't want to explain Japanese history or culture. I just want to write the story. That is a challenge for me, is keeping that away and trying to get straight to what the protagonist's issue is, trying to get the reader to emphasize with the protagonist's situation and keep the rest away from that. That's my challenge. My challenge when writing a short story. I'm not sure if it's that specific to Japan or not, but yeah.
Makes sense then.
Mm.
So, and the next question is about the challenges of writing a short story compared to a longer one. And then there's a question for both you and Becky, which is, do you think that short stories and graphic novels are having a bit of a resurgence?
Mm. Yeah. How about going for that one first, Rebecca?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
Okay.
There you go.
I
Give
actually,
you a bit of a
I
moment to
confess.
think.
Sorry, Cecilia. I confess I actually read more novels than short stories. I don't dislike short stories, but I just tend to be more drawn to novels. Um, are short stories having a resurgence? I know graphic novels are definitely on the rise, and I've never really read a graphic novel, but they do draw my eye in a bookshop. If I walk because I like looking at pictures, and so I might have a little flick through. I don't know if short stories are having a resurgence. I honestly don't know. Do you?
Mm. I don't at all.
We'll have to
I
Yeah.
ask the
think,
publisher.
well, I think that they've been a little bit out of favor for a while, but there are some really good short story writers out there, and I think that that's really helped um, draw more people in. And sort of, I think short stories have been a bit overlooked, but I think that that's beginning to change and move back again into a bit more prominence. There's, I've got favorite collections that I could go on about for a little bit, but I probably won't just because. Of time, and also the fact that there's just one last question about the challenges of writing a short story as compared to something longer, which I think you did answer in part, Chris.
Well, I tried to, yeah. I mean, I wrote a novel. Mm, I call it a novel, but anyway. Uh, and it really did take me 8 years, you know, from start to
Mm.
finish. Not that that was the only thing I was doing, you know. But I think it was as well the first time I tried it, and I tried a paint by numbers sort of approach, where I mapped out all the chapters
Mm.
and then filled in chapter by chapter, and well, it didn't work. And I just feel more in control of a short story when writing it. I can see what's coming, you know, sometimes.
Mm.
Sometimes I just let it roll, but I feel more in control of the writing situation. Um, yeah, I was looking at a video this morning. Paul Auster, you know, passed away sadly,
Oh, right,
Mm.
yeah.
and he was talking about his writing, obviously of novels, and how he kept rewriting paragraph by paragraph. You know, he was happy if one day he would just finish with one page. That was a great day for him. And yeah, you know, I felt for that really. The amount of control, not just his intelligence to be able to write such fantastic novels, you know, but the amount of control that he had in his writing and discipline, you know, it's just frightening. I couldn't do that. You know, I need a much smaller chunk to work on. Yeah. So
I
yeah.
think also they kind of almost like, I think Paul Auster aside, like sometimes the forms kind of demand a different sort of approach because that level of control is to most writers something that you can't completely have when you're writing a novel, but there's a level of precision and a level of purposefulness that comes from writing a short story because it's short. You know, most words, like you've chosen that word because of the way that it makes you as a reader feel. You've chosen to write in a particular way because of a particular feeling that you want to communicate, and that exists in novels, but you know, you have a lot more leeway to write description, to sort of paint with broader strokes, I guess, rather than and sort of, yeah, I guess be a bit more impressionistic, paint with broader strokes and sort of create a sense of a whole that, you know, makes sense because of all of the descriptions that you've peppered throughout and the impressions that you've created throughout. Whereas, you know, a short story is more of a like one of those detailed like etchings, I suppose, where each mark that you make really matters to the whole. Yeah, I started that analogy about like halfway through, and I think that works. But yeah.
Great
I
answer,
think what
great
you
answer.
just, if I may, I think what you just said, Cecilia, the story that Chris just read out is a really good example of that because it was just about decision making. And at the beginning, we have the man who cannot make decisions and all about all the decisions that he cannot make and how his life is governed by the fact that he cannot live with choices. And then something happens that he has no control over. And then we hear about all the people around him who made loads of decisions while he was unconscious. And then we finish with him having to make this massive decision. It was just a lovely, lovely construction and really just about one thing. I loved it.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I do think that that's probably all we have time for, but I think it's been a really interesting conversation. And I think if everyone would like to join me in thanking you, Chris and Becky, and also Amy as well, who's been answering questions in the chat and who helped us set up. It all worked. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, everybody, especially all the people that took time to join. I really appreciate it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, thank you.
Thank you.